Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
One NFL divisional preview down, 7 to go. We shift our attention from the AFC East to the NFC East this fine day. Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by NFL guru and insider, professional sports bettor, Payne Insider. And Payne, one division down, 28 teams left to go. How excited are you to jumpstart the week talking about some of these classic rivalries?
Always good getting the first one out of the way. Feeling a little bit better today. Still kind of fighting a head cold, but hopefully I sound...
Have you fully established your preseason / regular season health and nutrition regimen? I mean, people know all about your green juice, but they don't know all about the other supplements you try and take to keep yourself on the straight and narrow.
I feel like every single year around this time I get sick, but it's good, right? Get it out of the way now, preseason, and then just be ready to roll for the regular season.
I feel it's all the inevitable stress, anxiety, the changing of sleep schedules, and you ride the momentum through September, and you start to hit the dog days, needing a bye week by about the third week in October. And as we know all too well, winning is the ultimate cure-all, and we will continue to raise the bar as we always do. But the NFC East, 4 teams to break down. For those folks who did miss the AFC East breakdown, I encourage you guys to check that out. As always, you can find all the Bet the Board podcasts on your favorite podcasting platforms. And if you are subscribed to our channel, there's no reason you shouldn't be. All of these podcasts will be delivered right to your inbox, the same way that you can sign up for our Bet the Board newsletter, which you can get directly to your inbox each and every Friday throughout the season. And Payne, when we look at the landscape of the NFC East, it's a division that has now gone 18 years without a repeat division champion. We talk about parity. Hasn't quite necessarily been the case. There are a couple of franchises in that division, a little bit more maligned than others. But when we look at the Dallas Cowboys, this is a team hoping that they can break through. The Cowboys win total this year sits at 10, shaded to the over. There were plenty of 9.5s out there. Those are slowly disappearing from the marketplace. I wonder why. Wink, wink, nod, nod. When you look at the division odds here for the Cowboys, a shade better than plus $1.50 in that plus 160 range. To win the NFC, a little bit more than 5-1. And when you're talking about their odds to win the Lombardi Trophy, something they haven't done in a generation, you're looking at a price north of 11-1. They have accomplished back-to-back 12-win seasons. They've gone 10-5 in one-score games over the last 2 campaigns, so you do wonder how sustainable some of that is. But part of their success over the last 2 years is because of what Dallas is doing in terms of creating turnovers. A plus 24 turnover margin is 9 better than their second closest competition in the NFL. But Payne, when we look at the Dallas Cowboys, their offensive DNA has been something that's been on full display, but the names and faces will change, and maybe the most notable isn't Ezekiel Elliott being removed from the fold as a running back, although we'll see exactly how that situation plays out, but a new play caller, and it's the old school being new again, which should give Cowboys fans plenty of sleepless nights.
So, kind of before we get to the offense, we pulled the cliffhanger for the first time ever. And, I think every professional bettor looks at every angle possible before they invest. It's what makes them a pro. And, kind of go out of our way here, Todd, I think, to replicate that behavior on this podcast, right? It's what we do behind the scenes. So, I think it's probably a little disingenuous not to acknowledge the fact that Dallas does see an uptick in schedule strength this year. And it's probably very likely the Cowboys' fumble luck regresses. It's a 100% certainty the Cowboys' net red zone touchdown rate regresses. But those negatives, right, I think along with some of the question marks that you hinted at about the coaching staff, right, Mike McCarthy and, how he's portrayed publicly, the butt of so many jokes, the incessant underachieving from Dallas, falling flat when it matters most down the stretch seems to happen, routinely. it felt like that suppressed the current day Cowboys market price. And I know we're approaching 10 now after we gave it out on Thursday. But I just kind of look at this and said to myself, it's like the Eagles and Cowboys last year were separated by less than 1.5 points in our power ratings. That's how it ended, right? And one team was a play away from winning the Super Bowl and enters this season with a win total 11.5. The other had a win total of 9.5. So price matters. And I think there's, a lot to like as we dig into each side of the ball here. So I know you tried steering the ship, but I kind of just wanted to put that out there because, there's some certain question marks with Dallas, but I think, how they're priced, it doesn't necessarily need to be perfect and still get over that number with this
No, and I think
staff.
it's a fair assessment, and you raise an excellent point, talking about, win totals and the desire of professional bettors to tie up their money for an extended period of time. The edges have to be more substantial than they would be for a 60-minute sample size when you're talking about trying to identify opportunity on a week-in, week-out basis. So looking for some of that level of inefficiency, trying to exploit the narratives that may inflate in some cases, or in the case of the Dallas Cowboys, suppress their numbers. And when you look at the offensive side of the ball, we'll talk about it. It's Mike McCarthy and him taking over play calling responsibilities, theoretically in conjunction with Brian Schottenheimer from Kellen Moore, and what he did or didn't do. You can be critical of that. He kind of put forth his Mona Lisa every now and again, but it wasn't consistent enough. And when we look at Mike McCarthy, we know he's on a relatively short leash, that if the Cowboys aren't able to get over the hump with the current cast of characters they have, they're going to have some very hard decisions to figure out, not just as far as their coaches are concerned, but the man under center in Dak Prescott, who, whether it's right or wrong, when you put the star on your helmet, you're going to bear the brunt of a lot of criticism when things aren't going the way, and you probably get too much credit when the Cowboys offense is clicking along. He's put together 3 double-digit interception seasons over his last 4 campaigns. His 15 interceptions last year, career high, and a QBR was his lowest since 2018. The interception rate was there. There are some changing faces, especially in the backfield. A lot of expectations that Tony Pollard can be that bell cow back, but we'll see how he looks with an increased workload. But the Cowboys went out and they tried to add a weapon or two in the receiving core that could pay dividends. When you look at this Cowboys team offensively, are you optimistic with Mike McCarthy, or do you think the right pieces are correct for him to run an offense, assuming we get a redux of what it looked like in Green Bay?
So you mentioned Kellen Moore a little bit, and my understanding to this whole thing, and they're calling it the Texas Coast offense. It's effectively, McCarthy, Schottenheimer, they're merging Kellen Moore's offense with Marty Schottenheimer's West Coast vibes, right? It's supposed to be helping Dak and the offense not go through this massive undertaking in terms of systematic change, but making things simpler and installing concepts to player strengths. Basically, I was listening to a Schottenheimer interview, and he said it's still 70% of Kellen Moore's system, and then sprinkle in 30% of what Mike McCarthy likes to do and what my dad used to do. And so I'm hearing Dak's going to be allowed to do more at the line of scrimmage, get the ball out quicker. What's interesting is none of the offensive players doing camp interviews, if you've heard some of these, Todd, say anything close to what Mike McCarthy said a couple months ago, right? All the players are talking about this attacking style of offense. CeeDee Lamb mentioned more pushing the ball down the field. Nothing meshes present day compared to all of the concerning quotes from McCarthy a few months ago. But let's just kind of say the worst case situation, right? It ends up unfolding how Mike McCarthy described it, a couple months back, which, doesn't leave you brimming with confidence, right? The Cowboys were already extremely run-heavy last season, only 25th in pass rate the first 3 quarters, 29th on first down. If the run rates remain high, I think the glaring difference is Zeke Elliott's gone, right? He graded out 25th out of 31 qualifying running backs. In terms of rushing yards over expectation, Zeke was 43rd out of 48 backs, right? Average just 1 yard before contact, and you hit the Tony Pollard thing perfectly. It's like, I don't know if he can be a bell cow back, but he is awesome, right, with the ball in his hands, average more than 2 full yards per touch more than Zeke. You bring in Deuce Vaughn, and I understand, he might not be like a workout warrior here with all of the traits, but he was the war leader at running back in college football over his final 2 seasons. I think you're going to see more running back passes from this version of the Cowboys offense rather than, trying to throw it to Zeke, who's, pretty much plotting at this point. I thought one of the clear regression metrics that actually should help Dallas, and you referenced at the top, is Dak's interception numbers. His interception rate was nearly 4%. But when you dive a little bit deper, Dak had 18 turnover-worthy throws. 15 of them got picked off.
That's bad luck the way I see it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this, some of these examples for context. Josh Allen, 29 turnover-worthy throws, only 14 picks. Geno Smith, 29 turnover-worthy throws, 11 picks. So you can see how large Dak's delta was there. If you strip turnovers from all of the quarterbacks, Dak was 4th in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation, only trailed Mahomes, Allen, and Tua, ahead of both Burrow and Hurts. So bottom line, we're calling for improved play from Dak, especially if he, can improve throwing to the intermediate parts of the field, especially, between the hashes. And it hasn't happened yet, but, a couple of professional prop bettors I talked to are toying with the idea of going against market sentiment and betting his, interception total under. I think you mentioned some of the guys they brought in. Dak's going to have more help from the pass catching group. I mean, you kind of just go through this, right? CeeDee Lamb, guys looking to get paid, looking for a new deal. And, my respect for him grew last year. I know we kind of toyed with the idea, is CeeDee Lamb a true number one? Finished last year 6th in yards per route run, and he was the focal point every single week for defenses. Finished 4th in EPA among receivers. Go out, trade for a true number 2 in Brandon Cooks. The way he gets traded, I think perceptually, nobody views him as a great number 2, and he's had 9 straight seasons of positive receiver play, and that allows you to move Gallup back to wide receiver 3, kind of in that role. And the positive is further removed from the ACL injury. And I think if you can get Gallup back to the 2019, 2021 form, look out. And then you just do some reading and, you get some videos sent to you. And word out of Dallas camp is Tolbert and Turpin have taken steps as receivers to where they're going to be able to contribute this season. And then they're raving about Jalen Brooks, the rookie 7th rounder. He's had a big camp so far. Tight end, you're trying to replace 89 targets from Dalton Schultz. Feels like that probably gets done by committee. I like Jake Ferguson. Same body type and athletic profile as Schultz. No reason he can't have a breakout season. Been praised in camp for elite blocking. You still have Peyton Hendershot, who got his feet wet as a rookie, and hopefully Luke Schoonmaker gets healthy. Offensive line is doing some unique things this year that, with their alignments to protect Dak better, supposedly they haven't been seen. So we'll see how that kind of looks and feels. Tyler Smith, massive rookie season, was a day 1 starter last year, had some uneven play, but you could see the ceiling. He was dominant against Indy, Houston, Jacksonville, and Philadelphia late in the season. My understanding is, yes, Zach Martin's holding out, but he's going to return. Tyron Smith moving back to his natural position at left tackle. Monster news to kind of hear Terrence Steele was cleared for camp after tearing his ACL and MCL in December. Kind of another young kid in his prime coming off his best season. Really the weak spot is at center. Tyler Bayadesh is kind of just a replacement level guy. But on paper, right, this has the potential to be a very good Cowboys offense with balance. And, the hope again is all the players speak. That's how the Cowboys offense will operate. Certainly, the combination of McCarthy and Schottenheimer make me a little bit nervous, but behind the scenes, right? Behind the scenes, they've sought out the right kind of help from the right people to run an offense that looks present here.
Hey, you'd have to hope that Mike McCarthy has learned from some of his mistakes in the past, and it wasn't as though he didn't have playmakers in Green Bay. The one thing that often plagued him was conservative play calling after he got out to quick starts, and in the modern-day NFL, if he's able to keep his foot on the accelerator with all of the players that we highlighted there that the Cowboys have at their disposal, I mean, this is a group that can run away and hide, and you have to look no further than the way Philadelphia went about their business in the division. It doesn't matter what you do in the second half. If you take a 3-touchdown lead into the break, you have the world at your fingertips to try and call plays, and we'll see if the Cowboys are able to do that. if Dallas is successful on the offensive side, it obviously makes life a heck of a lot easier for Dan Quinn and what this group can do defensively. Talked a little bit about what Dan Quinn's influence has meant to this group that's forced 67 turnovers over the last 2 seasons. It's the first time a team has led the league in turnovers in back-to-back seasons since the Steelers accomplished the feat back in the early 70s. And when you look at the 67 turnovers, just to put that in context, it's 22 more than the league average. This is a group that created pressure at one of the league's top rates. We know what Micah Parsons means when he was healthy, and you saw his production fall off a little bit. I mean, this is a player that went from a heavy favorite to be Defensive Player of the Year after about week 9 or 10. That really was an afterthought when he wasn't able to get to the quarterback. But he's not the only one. There are other players, both along the defensive line and that linebacking group, that can make differences. We saw the Cowboys make a commitment to Trevon Diggs in the secondary. They bring over a consummate veteran in Stephon Gilmore, who's still on that other side of his career. But I think, Payne, when you look at the Dallas Cowboys, so much attention is paid to Dak and what this team does or doesn't do offensively, that defensively, some of the strides they made last year flew a little bit under the radar.
It's pretty obvious, right? Dan Quinn found his calling card. He's not a head coach, but a damn good defensive coordinator. And I think a lot of people probably understand he's not a head coach. Someone may dabble, but because of that understanding, Dallas has been pretty fortunate to keep him now for a third year. And, you know, kudos to him. Give him credit, right? He was willing to adapt before he died with some of his outdated and, you know, extremely difficult to replicate coverage schemes. And that's really revitalized his career and how we think of him. If you look at Quinn's defense, primarily lives in nickel and rushes 4. The Cowboys will dial up some pressure, slightly above league average blitz rate. If you look back-to-back seasons, the Cowboys have finished top 3 in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency. And you kind of mentioned the turnovers, but the byproduct of turnovers is pressure. And, you know, Dallas led the league with a 43% pressure rate last season, highest since the 2015 Denver Broncos. 693 pressures combined under Dan Quinn the last 2 seasons with the Cowboys. And, you know, it's just that's the equivalent, right? Like pressure burst pipes. 67 takeaways to your point. And I think when you kind of forecast ahead to 2023, you know, pressure rates probably has to drop, but it's probably not going to be a ton. Right? I mean, they have the horses there, and then you look at who they project to face. It's like a bottom 5 schedule of pass protecting offensive lines. And Dallas went out and added a little bit more depth to their front. We should see better coverage with Gilmore at corner, and that helps pressure the longer you can cover in the back. We know what Parsons and Lawrence can do. I mean, heck, you look at Parsons last year, played injured. Still registered more than an 18% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. DeMarcus Lawrence, over 13%. Dorrance Armstrong, over 12%. Dante Fowler Jr. reconnects with Dan Quinn, 16% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. You have Sam Williams, over 13%, and then they go out and draft one of the better college D linemen in Junior Feheko. And, you know, he's just got a motor that doesn't seem to stop. The Cowboys rotation, you look at that at end, it's just, you know, a bunch of rested bodies being thrown at tired tackles throughout games. I mean, they're going to go 6 deep. It's going to look like a hockey line change a lot of times. You look on the interior, that was the question mark heading into last season. Osa and Golston were serviceable. Jonathan Hankins was added late last season. I know his, you know, career's kind of tailed off a little bit, but, you know, he's had some monster seasons in 13, 14, 15, and 17, and the word out of camp is that he has been a standout, so maybe a little bit of a resurgence for Jonathan Hankins. Then you go out and you draft Maze Smith round 1. I know a lot of people didn't love the idea of, you know, taking a run-stuffing interior lineman that early, but you know, you're reading some of these camp reports, you're seeing some of the videos, just an absolute mauler inside. There's clips of Mazi Smith just ragdolling grown men, and I think he upgrades a position of need and is going to have an immediate role helping the Cowboys stop the run, especially when they go to those 3 down fronts. And Smith has the attitude you would want from an anchor of an interior line. And I can tell you, like, he wasn't slipping past Kansas City if he was still available. So he was going to be a first-round guy either way. And I think when you look at Mazi Smith and what he does, he's going to make life easier for the linebacker group. We saw Leighton Vander Esch coming off one of his best seasons since his rookie year. Damone Clark was thrown into the fire as a rookie linebacker last year, played almost 400 snaps at replacement level. Big camp so far. I think he's in a position to have a little bit of a sophomore surge. And then Overshown, the third-round rookie from Texas. I think he upgrades the speed, the talent, and the depth of the Cowboys linebacker room. He's flashed in camp so far. So it's a decent 3 there. And, the secondary is just, to me, it's a huge upgrade with Stephon Gilmore, especially when you look at the asking price. It was a 5th rounder. And I think you're right, getting up there in age. But if you look at Gilmore's last 1,300 snaps over 2 seasons with the Panthers and Colts, and I think that's probably why he's getting a little bit forgotten about, it looks pre-injury like. And, among corners with at least 500 snaps, Gilmore graded out 6th in coverage last season. We saw the obvious turnover regression or interception regression coming for Trevon Diggs last year, but he actually had his best season. Played above replacement level, played more than, snaps in 2022 than he did in 2021, and allowed 32% less receiving yards. And when he did get beat, it wasn't as badly. If you look at his yards per reception allowed, dipped over 6 yards from 18.5 in 2021 to 12.4. You have Deron Bland probably as the starter in the slot. Jordan Lewis battling some injury stuff. We'll see if he's able to return. All of a sudden, you have a nice little battle for slot corner position there. Safety is probably the least talented group on the Cowboys roster. Malik Hooker regained some of his 2018 form. You have Donovan Wilson, pretty good against the run. There's just not a lot of holes when you look at this starting 22. And you think again, it's like, Dallas has won 12 games back-to-back seasons. And then, you kind of look ahead and Dallas is a preseason underdog by more than 1 point just 3 times all season. So again, there's room for coaching error here relative to the win total. The schedule is kind of wild in that there's some really top-heavy games, like traveling to Buffalo and Miami and San Francisco and Philly. But there's games where Dallas is going to be large favorites as well, and it all adds up to being just basically a league average schedule in totality here.
Yeah, if the Cowboys are able to navigate through the first 6 weeks, they have one of the earlier bye weeks coming week 7. They'll play 4 road games in their first 6. They'll start on the road in the division, essentially a home away from home against the Giants. And then they'll close out, we'll call it the first half, which is a little bit aggressive there with back-to-back trips against the 49ers. They'll stay out west and follow it up on a Thursday night against the Chargers. If they're able to get through that stretch at 4-2 or even better, this team becomes a very difficult thorn in the side of everybody in the NFC, where, as we've talked about at great lengths, and it'll be a continuing theme through all these preseason podcasts, not exactly a murderer's row compared to what you have to go through week in, week out in the AFC. So stock arrows pointing up for what the Dallas Cowboys can expect this year, especially given the way that they're being priced in the markets. What goes up, Payne, must come down. And when we talk about the Dallas Cowboys and optimism there, I'm not sure the market has the same sentiment towards the New York Giants right now. Their win total, 7.5, shaded to the under. That's down about a full game from where it opened at some shops earlier in the spring. When you look at their odds to win the division, they're third favorites at 7-1 or thereabouts to win the NFC and Super Bowl, talking about prices floating in the mid-20s and upwards of 60-1 to win the Lombardi. And as far as the Giants were concerned, Brian Daboll, Coach Kafka, and Martindale deserve a ton of credit for what they were able to accomplish in their first season in Gotham. The Giants won their opener versus the Titans, which allowed them to have their first winning record in 6 seasons at 1-0. They didn't have a losing record at any point for the entire season. They were an ATS juggernaut, consistently undervalued by the betting market, going 13-4 ATS through 17 regular season games. They had a ton of success as far as one-score games and variance was concerned, 8-4-1 in those contests, but they struggled when they stepped up in class, and it's something that we highlighted when we broke down the Giants' date against Philadelphia in the playoffs of how they performed against the bottom feeders the way that you need to if you're going to start to build momentum, but they just didn't have that high-end talent going 2-7 versus playoff teams. And obviously, interestingly enough, when asked about what he wanted to see from himself in year 2, Brian Daboll, with his own unique sense of humor, said the one thing he wanted to improve more than anything else was his weight and his overall fitness that he often said he neglected in his first campaign as a head coach. But Payne, if there's reason that Giants fans should be optimistic that it wasn't just a flash in the pan, despite not having some of the pieces, the difference makers, offensive or defensively, it's the fact of what they have working on the offensive side with one of the more unheralded offensive minds calling plays for a newly minted franchise quarterback in Daniel Jones.
the man enjoys a good stiff drink and a cigar. He's probably going to cut back on that a little bit this year. And, I think your first talking point's probably the best place to start because of what the Giants did last year. And I can tell you at the onset of last season, like Brian Daboll did not expect to only lose 7 games. He didn't envision winning a road playoff game in the preseason. And you just think about what, the Giants were. I mean, it was this salary cap strapped team with little mobility, and they hadn't had a winning record at any point the prior 5 seasons. But you pair really good coaching with really good luck. It's a tough combination to beat. And that was the Giants season in a nutshell. Metrically, as a whole, the Giants performed like a below-average football team. If you look at estimated wins, Giants were a 7-win football team right in line with market expectation last year. Fourth quarter win share, the Giants were a 7-win football team. Team schedule adjusted efficiency, the Giants were outside the top 20. On top of that, right, the Giants played a below league average schedule in terms of difficulty. They caught some big breaks along the way, right? I mean, you kind of mentioned that Titans game at the top.
Go for 2, baby. Go for 2.
Opener. Right, but you're down multiple scores and needed an 8-point final drive to win by 1. You trailed by a touchdown in the second half to, Baker Mayfield in your home opener, who went 14 for 29 in that game. You got fortunate and saw Cooper Rush and not Dak in week 3. Week 4 was a rookie in Justin Fields making, his 4th start as a pro. Trailed by double digits in the second half, week 5 against Green Bay, and go on to win. Week 6, trailed by double digits at home with less than 7 minutes to go against Baltimore and win. You trailed Jacksonville with 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and that was the pre-bye week Jags when they weren't really humming at that point. Outplayed and outgained by 1.2 yards per play at home by the Texans. You played a backup quarterback, Taylor Heineke, twice. Played the Colts' third-string quarterback, Nick Foles. And, all told, the Giants only lost 4 of their 13 one-score games. So there was a lot of fortune here for the Giants, and I think some of that happened on offense, if we want to start there.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to go because obviously the biggest question going into last year is what the Giants could expect from Daniel Jones. Was he going to be able to scratch the surface with a change in coaching philosophy? Was he going to be their guy going forward? And when we look at Jones, he completed a career-high 67% of his passes, accumulated a 3-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, ran for over 700 yards, something that you predicted on this very podcast last year, that you thought his season-long rushing numbers did not give credit to what White Vic was able to do out there. The problem for Daniel Jones, though, is when you look at his career and a larger sample size, he still has a lot of questions that have to be answered despite the new deal. Of 30 quarterbacks with 1,000 attempts from 2018 to 2021, Daniel Jones ranked between 25 and 30 in virtually every more important quarterback metric. When you look at last season, even though he took a step forward, there was only one quarterback who played at least 15 games and threw fewer than 15 touchdowns, and his name was Jacoby Brissett, who's now a backup that we'll get to later on in the show in the nation's capital, behind Sam Howell. And as far as his yards per attempt, obviously by design, given the receivers he has at his disposal. But what can we expect for Daniel Jones in his swan song, and can he live up, I shouldn't say swan song, can he live up to the lofty expectations that'll be heaped on his shoulders given that big offseason contract?
You know where I do my best thinking.
I do, so and you may not want to divulge that secret with the listeners.
I was trying to figure out how to articulate this in the shower today, and the best I came up with was basically Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka constructed the perfectly robotic offense, and they have been trained by the best coaches for years, Nick Saban and Andy Reid. And then in recent years, behind the scenes, Daboll and Kafka have wanted to continue learning, and they've been assisted by the best analytical minds. And so it's like they loaded all of this data right into like an AI machine, and it spit out everything. The types of throws Daniel Jones is best at, add more of those to his plate. The throws Daniel Jones can't make, remove those almost completely. Run the quarterback. And Daniel Jones, to your point at the top, eclipsed his rushing total last season by 120%. It was basically this paint-by-number formula on how to be more efficient on early downs. And sure enough, even with the lack of talent and one of the most injured receiver groups in the NFL, the Giants were 8th in early down success rate, and that allowed them to be fringe top 5 in third down avoidance. The way defenses have changed in recent years, right? Think Patrick Mahomes and how defenses are playing him, right? Basically forcing offenses to be more methodical. That means red zone trips have far more value now if you're not hitting the explosive touchdowns. The Giants, 5th best when they got to the red zone. Part of that was Daniel Jones' legs, again, in those high leverage red zone situations. Jones had 7 rushing touchdowns. But the Giants faced a schedule of red zone defenses that was 26th in the league. The Giants also lost the least amount of EPA due to turnovers, so that helped them right in those one-score games. The offense has far more talent this year. I don't think there's any question about that. And if you're doing some reading or get some good information, the Giants are effectively pushing the envelope now on positionless football. Lining up Paris Campbell out of the backfield and catching passes, right? Having Darren Waller motion around in the backfield, having Saquon line up at receiver. All of the, elite offensive tactics to basically put players in best positions and keep defenses guessing. Daboll and Kafka are going to do. But now there's a little bit of film, right? The schedule of defenses the Giants project to face is the best in the NFL. Best passing defenses, best pass rushing defenses, a massive uptick in red zone defenses. And to your point, Daniel Jones played well enough, and I think this is what you were kind of hinting at, right? He plays well enough, and the team's success is the best it's been, and that kind of forced the Giants into paying Daniel Jones. And don't get me wrong, right? Like when you add Daniel Jones' legs to the equation, he was 11th out of 31 quarterbacks in adjusted EPA per play. But Jones, if you look, graded out 16th best quarterback among 25 qualifiers just in terms of passing. QB 14 out of 20 from a clean pocket, and I made sure the sample size was large enough. It's why there was only 20 quarterbacks in there. Jones wasn't really asked to be more than a game manager. 29th out of 33 quarterbacks in percentage of throws that traveled at least 10 yards. And so it's vital that Daniel Jones kind of, takes the training wheels off and takes his game to the next level as a passer. Has more options to throw to. And again, the group should have positive health regression. The Giants had the 3rd most injured receiver room last year. Isaiah Hodgins and Darius Slayton came on strong. Saquon Barkley led the team in targets. Good to get him back from the holdout. Jalen Hyatt, he's been a factor in camp, and I think Daboll and Kafka are smart enough to figure out how to get him as many free releases as possible since, the knack on him is he has trouble beating press coverage. There's optimism about Wan'Dale Robinson being a factor at some point this season. Was a great after the catch guy as a rookie. Need Darren Waller to be healthy, not just because of the skill set, but he is effectively positionless. You look at his career, 44% of his snaps have been inline, 33% in the slot, 23% out wide. Waller's a 2-yard per route run type of tight end, when he's rolling and healthy. Offensive line needs to be better. And there's some signs that you could see an uptick there. But last year, it was bad. Only the Vikings and Chargers gave up more pressures. And sure, like Daniel Jones' release time can be quicker. They basically, ran this rollout option where, he's holding the ball, trying to find someone to get open. If not, he's taken off. But, more than a 42% pressure rate allowed is ridiculous. The Giants were 29th in pass block win rate. But you found your horse, right? Like Andrew Thomas is that guy. Apparently, one of the league's best tackles. Yep. He was elite last year, as good as it gets. Arguably, the best tackle in football. And now it looks like Joshua Zudu is pushing for the left guard job, 3rd-round rookie in 2022. If it's not him, then it's Ben Breederson. Rookie John Michael Schmitz is going to start day 1 at center. Mark Lewinsky at right guard. Be nice if he can get back to his 2021 form with Indianapolis. Evan Neal, right, was thrown into the fire as a rookie, started, right away. He only had 2 games with at least replacement level play last season. He was a liability at right tackle, but the pedigree's there for Evan Neal, right? 5-star kid, massive height, wingspan, 7th overall pick, so I would expect a sophomore surge there. For me, I can't get past the fortunes of last season and the schedule increased this season. And I think the conversation, to your point, changes a little bit, right? The reason the market's vastly different than it was, a couple months ago, pro bettors got out ahead, played the Giants under 8.5 wins minus 50 and 60. That's why we're now at, 7.4. So you just kind of want to present this the right way in the current market. If this was still 8.5 minus 150, it's probably our best bet at the end of the show, Todd. It's just a little bit different of a conversation, but still contextually right? This is our thoughts and viewpoints that it's probably very difficult to outperform everything the way they did last year again as the schedule increases.
If we think that there's inevitably going to be a regression, even with better health for the team offensively, what do we think this defense looks like in 2023? They finished last year 22nd in points per game allowed and 25th in yards per game. This group actually dealt with poor injury luck, relatively speaking. They should be better in that regard, but they did allow 5.2 yards per attempt on the ground. It was one of the worst marks in terms of being able to stop the run. You look at some of the names that are out there, though. I mean, Dexter Lawrence led the team in sacks and was named to the All-Pro team. I mean, Leonard Williams dealt with injuries. His sacks and his quarterback hit numbers reflected that. Kayvon Thibodeau started to come on, started 14 games, ended the year with 40 tackles, 40 pressures, but didn't turn nearly as many of those into sacks. But he was extremely critical of his own performance, so you'd hope that he's able to take the next step in his sophomore campaign. They bring in Bobby Okereke from Indianapolis to clean things up in the linebacking core. I mean, this is a guy who is a tackling machine. We'll see if that carries over. And defensively, especially in their backfield, you would think this group can be better, but you look at a player like Adoree Jackson, he has perpetually been a Band-Aid, just can't stay on the football field. And when he did last year, the numbers weren't great. You draft a player in Deonte Banks that you want to throw into the deep end of the pool day one, hoping that he can adapt to what Wink wants to do from a defensive scheme standpoint. But defensively, for this Giants team, can they do enough if the offense experiences regression and doesn't allow them a chance to breathe?
So I'm probably a little different in mindset than you or the market. I mean, Wink was shown the door in Baltimore after 10 years for being too predictably aggressive. And I didn't think year one with the Giants went well. And of course, Wink didn't really learn from the reason he was let go. I mean, he ran the most blitz-happy defense in the NFL and ran gobs of man behind it, and that didn't help when you don't have the dudes, especially with all of the injuries. And so the Giants went from slightly below average in 2021 to 29th in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency last season. And I know, you read articles and, the Giants improved in this area and that area. Yeah, pressure. And I understand that matters, but it's manufactured pressure. And you really think about that 29th ranking, it's like Brian Daboll's offense didn't put Wink's defense in bad positions. And just across the board, the Giants were 28th in EPA per play allowed, 31st in early down success rate allowed, and that was against the 7th easiest schedule of offenses. The saving grace for the Giants defense were the variance metrics, right? Top 8 in red zone defense, 4th on third down. The schedule gets more difficult this season for the Giants defense as well. We're projecting a schedule of passing offenses that's knocking on the door of being top 10. And candidly, if there isn't material improvement this season, I think this probably has to be a CFL 2 and out for Wink. Daboll has to probably move on, especially when you see the talent. They're not void of talent, right? You mentioned Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams. That's a great 1-2 punch up front. I mean, Lawrence had 63 pressures and 22 hits on the quarterback as, a 340-pound interior lineman. There's not many guys at that size that move that well. He finished 4th in pass rush win rate among defensive tackles. Leonard Williams has stacked 8 straight seasons of good to great play, finished top 10 in run-stop win rate among defensive tackles, and battled injuries all last season. You mentioned Kayvon Thibodeau, had an above-replacement level rookie season while dealing with a knee injury to start his career. I think you have a massive stock arrow up in year 2. Brought in Ashawn Robinson to help a dead last run defense. He's been a solid run defender the last 2 seasons. Azeez Ojulari only played 7 games, but had a 14% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. I think if the Giants are healthier up front, and, you should see positive regression there, having, the 5th most injured defensive line last season. I think they have a chance to be a top 10 unit. You mentioned the splash signing at linebacker with Bobby Okereke. It was a contract year. Shaq Leonard went down. Okereke basically had a really nice season for Indy. He's fast. He's talented. It's a devalued position, but it was a position of glaring need for the Giants. Gerard Davis was supposed to be the running mate to Okereke. Had knee surgery 3 weeks ago. I don't know if a lot of people know about that. It looks like Micah McFadden's going to be propelled into the starting role. 5th rounder out of Indiana, played nearly 450 snaps as a rookie. Graded out linebacker 88 among 93 qualifiers.
It's not very good.
If Bobby Okereke, no. If Bobby Okereke doesn't have the type of season he had in a contract year, and prior data would suggest he probably won't, I still have questions about the linebacker room. The secondary is very interesting. Not just one rookie, but there is a real possibility of both Deontay Banks and Trey Hawkins to start outside, and Adoree Jackson would then move into the slot. Dayball and Wink want to see what that looks like a little bit more, but that's been the most consistent corner alignment through camp so far. I mean, you talk about being thrown into the fire. I mean, it's even a 6th-round rookie from ODU potentially starting, but Trey Hawkins has flashed. Xavier McKinney needs a bounce-back year, played below replacement level. We know some of the off-field stuff that kind of went on there leading into last season. Jason Pinnock has showed to be a good run defender and tackler, but a liability in coverage. As I kind of like project ahead here, Todd, I think for the Giants defense to get to average, you need a couple things to happen, right? Health has to improve because I think the unit's still paper thin, lacks a ton of depth. D-line has to be elite this season. Okereke has to play as well as he did last year. Xavier McKinney must get back to the 2021 form, and the rookie corners have to be as good as advertised. To me, that's a lot.
Look, if all else fails, though, at the linebacker position, Payne, I mean, maybe Blake Martinez is going to need to come back to the NFL, being excommunicated from the trading card community for a Pokemon card scam of late.
You saw that, and supposedly behind the scenes, he was an investor of said company that has booted him. So that's
always fun to watch transpire.
Interesting, yeah.
But no, I mean, look, I think the Giants, to your point at the top, I mean, exceeded everyone's expectations last year. It was a fan base that had been craving a team that could be competitive. You go out there, not only make the playoffs, but go on the road, beat the Minnesota Vikings, and then you see exactly the difference between the haves and have-nots, even within your own division, against a rested Eagles side that reminded you, hey, look, you may have made these strides in the right direction, but there is still a massive chasm if you're going to be a legitimate NFC contender. And we'll see what the Giants are able to do this year. Talked a little bit about the salary cap hell that they were in, the situations that were created with Joe Judge as their head coach and Dave Gettleman as general manager. The bottom line is the Giants could be a better football team this year, but it may not show up in the wins and losses because of a lot of the indicators that you highlighted in the breakdown.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, there is a extreme possibility this is a better team metrically in a lot of areas, and they don't sniff the 9 wins they had last season.
It's what we always discuss. I mean, that's why you can't get caught up in wins and losses, especially if you're a professional bettor or if you have a desire to turn a little bit more profit year in, year out. You know, sometimes those results can lie. They're not necessarily indicative or indicative of future successes. So we'll keep tabs on the Giants and exactly how this team will look. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, you're going to want to follow all things Bet the Board at Bet the Board Pod. And as we talked about at the top of the show, if you happen to miss the AFC East breakdown, that's available for you on the Bet the Board website, or of course, if you're subscribed to your favorite podcast channels. Also encourage you sign up for the Bet the Board newsletter, so that way everything is delivered right to your inbox. When we look at the gold standard, at least last year in the NFC East, it was, of course, the Philadelphia Eagles who came up just short down there in Phoenix, Arizona against the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. And as far as the Eagles' season-long projecting numbers as far as odds makers are concerned, they are the odds-on favorite to win the division. You have to lay $1.05 on the low end, upwards of $1.15 to $1.20. Their win total sits at 10.5, heavily shaded to the over. There are obviously some different numbers out there. Less than 4-1 to win the NFC, and well less than 10-1 to win the second Lombardi Trophy in franchise history. The Eagles last year, Payne, finished with a 7-1 record in one-score games, with the second highest winning percentage in the league, and were the league's second highest overachievers in a category that one of our staff writers, Billy, likes to lean on, in Pythagorean wins. As far as this team offensively, they changed their offensive coordinator. They changed their defensive coordinator. There are a lot of fresh faces as far as starters on the defensive side of the ball. But we can start with this group offensively, where Brian Johnson gets promoted internally from the quarterback coach spot. The offense was the second most prolific in the league. And this is a team that started out each and every week with their foot on the accelerator. They went out, they were uber aggressive. They threw the football, and it allowed them to run the ball in the third and fourth quarter. They had a massive point differential by the time they got to halftime. And as a result, you saw some of the gaudy numbers that Jalen Hurts put forth. But Jalen Hurts didn't do it alone. There were a ton of difference makers both in the receiver room in the backfield, and an offensive line that had remarkable levels of health to provide that protection that a young quarterback needs as he was looking to grasp Jonathan Gannon's concepts. When we look at Philadelphia offensively, impossible to see this group exceeding expectations last year, but I asked the simple question, do they have to for this team to be successful and exceed odds makers' expectations?
Oof, that's a really good question. I mean, at this point, it's all about offense, I think. I mean, listen, you just kind of look at this across the board. The Eagles have an elite O-line, right? Great pass catchers, one of the most successful ground games, a really efficient quarterback. And Jalen Hurts is a different breed. Like, he's a different mindset type of guy. He just works. He puts in the time. So it wouldn't surprise me if he took another step. And I know Philly is one of the most analytical franchises, and they really assist the coaching staff and put them in the best position to win. And the one thing that we've seen from data over the last couple of years is offense is more repeatable. Defense has a little bit more variance year to year. But I am interested to see, what the Eagles' offense looks like without Shane Steichen. And
correction for me. I mentioned Jonathan Gannon on the offensive side. That's the defensive side. I was jumping the gun. So thank you for correcting me there.
Yeah, from when I look at him, it's like, we only had about 2 seasons of data, so it's tough. But if you think about this, like, Steichen was the guy that basically helped transform Philly's offense in Week 8 of the 2021 season. And a couple times now, if you're like a loyal listener, I've referenced that hell game in Las Vegas, like how Derek Carr went out and completed over 91% of his passes. And from that point forward, the Eagles started playing tighter coverage. But the media kind of only covered that story. So the transition, the following week from Sirianni calling plays to Steichen really wasn't covered. And if you try to find this out in the interwebs, there is no defined date, because this is kind of how it unfolded behind the scenes. But you look at the first 7 weeks, Philly was 22nd in EPA per play on offense. Steichen takes over, and from week 8 onward, 6th. And then last season, Steichen and the offense improved again. Jalen Hurts was obviously a big reason for that, but you hit it perfectly. Like, the Eagles would throw early to build leads, 5th highest pass rate in the first half. Hurts was 2nd in yards per attempt, but the ground game was wildly efficient, number 1 in both EPA and success rate on early downs the first 3 quarters. If you look at Jalen Hurts, by success rate, was the most efficient qualifying runner in the modern era. So it was really this perfect balance. Now all of a sudden, right, the Eagles are replacing their offensive coordinator, and at the same time, the schedule of defenses Philly plays goes from bottom 10 in the league to top 10. Brian Johnson's an interesting case study, and he was promoted within to be the Eagles OC and play caller, young guy. If you're in your 30s and 40s, you're going to know the name, right? A former Utah quarterback, led the undefeated Utes, to the Sugar Bowl and beat Alabama. He has play calling experience at the college level. Did it for his alma mater in 2012 and 13. Brian Johnson was ultimately let go after 2 seasons, but he did improve Utah's offense metrically. Dan Mullen brought Johnson in to be Mississippi State's QB coach. He was Dak Prescott's guy.
I feel old listening to this right now. That's my one major takeaway from all of this.
And you look at that success with Dak, and it landed him the Houston OC job in 2017. Slight improvement for that offense metrically, and then he left after 1 season to reunite with Dan Mullen at Florida, eventually became the Gators OC in 2020. Florida finished top 5 in offensive efficiency, and since then, Johnson's been in the Eagles organization. So, the little bit of data we have as a play caller, he's shown incremental improvement to the offense every single time. And again, I think the floor is really high here with the talent and what the organization does to help the coaches. Everything feels like it's in place for Brian Johnson to be successful. O-line returns 4 or 5 starters. Jordan Mailata, stud left tackle, equally good as a pass protector and mauler. Landon Dickerson is just a behemoth, right? Just a mammoth of a human, can move people. Improved as a pass blocker from year 1 to year 2, which was huge. We know what Jason Kelsey is, first ballot Hall of Famer, coming off his, one of his best seasons ever at age 35. Lane Johnson, elite right tackle. Cam Jurgens, the 51st overall pick in 2022, is going to start at right guard. If you've listened to their O-line coach, Jeff Stoutland, basically comparing Juergens to Brandon Brooks, who was a 3-time Pro Bowler. Really the only area you'd ask the Eagles O-line to improve in, cut down on the mistakes. Philly was the most penalized offensive line. Receiver room, super electric, right? A.J. Brown kind of propelled the offense to another level. We talked about what his addition last offseason would mean and how his play kind of perfectly meshed with the Eagles' RPO system, and his route tree was where Jalen Hurts needed to improve, and he helped Jalen Hurts improve in those areas. It wasn't a big surprise. 2.6 yards per run last season, caught 50% of contested catches for A.J. Brown, a force after the catch, and then because of that attention on A.J. Brown, it allowed Devontae Smith to improve, 2 yards per route run. If you look at that tandem, they were responsible for 62% of the Eagles' receiving yards, 72% of touchdowns. Word out of camp right now is Quez Watkins has taken the next step and is ready to flourish. Dallas Goedert, top 5 pass-catching tight end. Running back room, to me, is stocked. You have Rashad Penny, Swift, Gainwell, and Scott. I don't think anybody is going to, remember Miles Sanders. I really don't. Penny just needs to avoid injury. But you look at him metrically the last 2 seasons behind far worse offensive lines in Seattle, 6.2 yards a carry his last 180 carries. He's elusive for this, stocky, pigeon-toed runner. Over 71% of Penny's yards the last 2 seasons has come after first contact. I'm told DeAndre Swift is playing at an extremely high level in camp, remotivated, re-energized, body looks a little bit better, back around some of his Georgia guys. Internally, if Swift stays healthy, it's believed he could lead the team in carries, and we know what he provides in the pass game. Philly, just a really friendly running back system, and the word is Brian Johnson wants the running backs to be more of a focal point in the pass game this season. It's a team emphasis. They were bottom 5 in the NFL and running back targets last season. So this offense, just talent-wise, is absolutely loaded. And again, the floor is extremely high. I would guess if Jalen Hurts takes that next step, the ceiling, could improve a little bit as well, but the schedule certainly gets
over under
tougher.
9.5 games missed between DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny. I mean, which way are you going? Or is that number a little bit too aggressive? Given the fact that everything you said is spot on, dead balls accurate in terms of how explosive these players have been, but you do have 2 injury-prone running backs, and you'll see if they can stay out there healthy, this backfield, to your point, is as good as anybody. You just wonder if their depth will be tested. But credit to Philadelphia, they're not the only 2 capable ball carriers. I mean, there's some other guys that are there that you can lighten the workload if need be.
Yeah, Gainwell and Scott have been in the system for a while now. We saw Gainwell really flourish late in the season, was getting a lot of those crunch time carries late in the year. So, Boston Scott,
Giant killer Boston Scott. Bet him anytime touchdown, anytime they play the Giants, apparently.
Yeah, so the running back room is, I think, well
defensively,
situated.
Sean Desai takes over from Jonathan Gannon. He makes the trip across the country from Seattle. Like I mentioned at the top, they lose 5 starters from last year's group. Out are C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Marcus Epp, T.J. Edwards, Kazir White, and Javon Hargrave. But they do bring back a lot of familiar faces from a top 10 scoring defense last year. The defense finished the season with 70 sacks. It was 15 more than any other team. That number fell 2 sacks short of the Bears' record that they set way back in 1984. It was the only team in the league that had 4 players generate 40 quarterback pressures. Were ranked first in ESPN's pass rush win rate, and then they obviously go out and draft every single available player they possibly could from the Georgia Bulldogs defense to add to the existing cast that they already had in town. But Payne, so much of what they were able to do from a defensive philosophy standpoint was predicated on the offense getting out, building leads, allowing these guys to pin their ears back, knowing that opposing offenses could be a little bit one-dimensional. The one area where they were a little bit deficient in the middle of the year was stopping the run. They basically went to the retirement home and brought in a lot of familiar faces to plug some of those gaps. When you look at Philadelphia defensively, do you have any concerns coming into the season, or are you optimistic that what they were able to do last year playing with leads is sustainable if they find themselves in a lot tighter football games deep into the fourth quarter?
I think that was really well said. When you don't have to guess on defense, life becomes much easier. And when your offense is building those massive leads, much to do with efficiency, much to do with the schedule.
They get credit for building those leads. It was by design. It wasn't
Yes.
philosophically lucking
Well,
into
the schedule helped.
There you
the
go.
schedule helped too. Yeah, it was a little bit of both, but I think we'll see some regression, and we kind of saw it in spots last year. Obviously, Jonathan Gannon takes the Cardinals' job. I think he's a good defensive coordinator. I don't think he's elite. Right, he's getting a lot of credit for coming up with that game plan against Patrick Mahomes when he was with the Colts years ago, and then kind of mixed bag since then. The Eagles actually lost the Vic Fangio sweepstakes to Miami. So what did Philly do? They go out and hire a Vic Fangio disciple in Sean Desai. That was a guy we dove into pretty hardcore during our 2021 Bears preview. And you listen to Desai constantly is just praising Vic Fangio any chance he gets, loves to call him his mentor. Desai was one and done in Chicago once Ryan Poles came in and cleaned house, but Desai ran an above-average schedule-adjusted defense in 2021 for Chicago. A year later, the Bears dipped to dead last in defensive efficiency, so he knows what he's doing. The Eagles, to your point, were able to maintain more defensive pieces than I think initially expected this offseason, especially in the secondary. But I think the loss of Javon Hargrave hurts, right? 13% pressure rate on pass rush snaps from the interior, double-digit sacks. It's tough to replace. You kind of mentioned the Super Bowl chasing vets there in Linval Joseph and Sue. They weren't re-signed. Fletcher Cox, best days are behind him, right? 4 straight seasons of regression. Cox played below replacement level last season. He's turning 33. I think it's now kind of that transition to the young guys on the inside. Cox will be there for some snaps and some maturing and naturing development of some of these guys. Jalen Carter has shown flashes already to be dominant in camp with his power. Milton Williams made a massive leap from rookie to sophomore season. He's had a monster camp so far. Jordan Davis, if you listen to his presser recently, was excited to let people know he's in better shape this season. He can play 5 snaps in a row. He's a pure run-stopping nose tackle at this point. Had 112 pass rush snaps last season. Didn't contact the quarterback once. So that's really Jordan Davis's role at this point. The edge is where the dudes are, right? Josh Sweat continues to grow. Love seeing how he's overcame all the knee injuries, 4 straight seasons of improvement, just got paid, 12% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, and he can set the edge. He did it at an elite level last season. Brandon Graham just continues to defy father time at 35 years old, had a 16% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, played the run well. Derek Barnett returns from an ACL tear in week 1 last season, kind of the forgotten man. Word was he could be cut. Restructured his contract recently. Let's see if that keeps him safe. Hassan Reddick, 15% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. There's just gobs of guys that can bring edge pressure for the Eagles, and while he's extremely raw in his hands and his toolbox are far from refined, word is like Nolan Smith's burst off the edge is the best on the team. Nakobe Dean takes over as the starting linebacker in year 2. He's going to be the voice of the defense, the mic. The 2 games Dean played last season where he had the most snaps, he played well. Let's keep an eye on the ankle injury, though. TJ Edwards left. Kaiser White is gone. Nicholas Morrow was supposed to be the guy beside Dean in this 4-2-5 defense that Desai runs. Morrow's 6th season in the league. Didn't play in 2021. Has been a below replacement level player every season. And so with Nakobe Dean and his injury history and Morrow's play, it doesn't shock me that last night Philly went out, signed Miles Jack and Zach Cunningham, 2 veteran linebackers. I was actually, in my notes, did one of those things where you hint at something about to happen, and then Shefty scooped me at about dinner time last night on the Miles Jack
You're not
signing.
here to break news. I mean, you can insinuate. You can't tip your hand about all the sources that you
That's
have in
true.
your Rolodex.
Slay and Bradbury, both back. That did not look like that was going to be a thing earlier this offseason. Both were top 5 in adjusted yards allowed per coverage snap on the outside. Avonte Maddox will man the slot. Back-to-back good seasons there. The safety position looks thin to me, right? Reed Blankenship is going to lead the way in year 2. Played almost 300 snaps as a rookie, was a plus player. I think he's got a bright future. Terrell Edmonds, replacement level player that's never lived up to the first-round status. The Eagles need, the young kids up front to be ready ASAP. You need Nakobe Dean to be healthy. Need the safety position not to be a glaring weakness. Past that, I mean, the reason we're kind of projecting some defensive regression here is, last season Philly faced the second easiest schedule of offenses, the second easiest schedule of passing offenses. we're projecting a top 5 schedule of passing offenses. That's the largest increase in difficulty year over year, and something, we kind of outlined in our Super Bowl preview. If you go back or you just remember that, the good offenses torched Philly last season. They just didn't play many of them. Only 2 top 10 offenses all season. One wasn't when they played the game, and it was in a monsoon.
And the game still went over the total.
Yeah, it did. Thank God, boy.
Well, we could have doubled down on game day and had an additional 6 points compared to the opening number that we went over.
That might have been the worst CLV we've had in a total in the history of doing this. And we loved that bet, and we just watched it trickle down all week because of the weather. But you think about the schedule, right? Like week 1 against Detroit, the Eagles' defense performed below expectation by a wide margin. Lions finished that week 6th in EPA per play. Green Bay, fringe top 10 offense, 11th best last season. Eagles defense undershot expectation by its widest margin of the season. Packers had the 4th best EPA per play in week 12. At Dallas, week 16 got shredded. Cowboys had the 5th best EPA per play that week. We know, right, how the Super Bowl went. Every good offense in normal weather conditions really hurt the Eagles defense, and now the number of top 10 offenses is going to increase a lot this season. Probably not going to be playing with as many leads based upon the schedule of defenses increasing as well for that Philly offense. So we're projecting some defensive regression.
And when you look at Philadelphia's schedule, they do have a relatively soft landing spot with 3 of their first 4 games at home. Even if one of those 4 games is against one of their most heated rivals, things really start to get interesting for Philadelphia in the middle of the campaign. A stretch that sees them from week 9 to week 14 take on the Cowboys, have their bye week, go to Kansas City, home against Buffalo, home against San Francisco, a return trip against Dallas. And if you believe in the Seahawks, you can tack that on week 15. So the Eagles will have to work a little bit more in 2023 than what they had to do last year. But if this offense is worth their salt with a lot of the playmakers they have here, it may not be massive regression, but we'll see if they're able to outperform the market this season. The final team in the division, Payne, optimism reigns supreme for the Washington Commanders, and it's not necessarily because what they're going to be able to achieve on the football field this year. It's because they finally got rid of the cancer that was holding down the franchise in Daniel Snyder, with Josh Harris's group taking over, which leads you to believe that there could be a lot of players and or coaches on notice with a new regime change. When you're looking at some of the season-long numbers in the betting markets for the Commanders, their win total, 6.5 shaded to the under at minus $1.20, 12-1 long shots to win the division, and if you believe in miracles, they're 45-1 or thereabouts to win the NFC, and the price to win the Super Bowl is north of 125-1. Ron Rivera, meanwhile, still trying to deliver his first winning season after 3 campaigns of what can truly be defined as mediocrity. The Commanders will have their 6th different opening day starting quarterback since the 2017 season. Unfortunately, they bid a fond farewell to Carson Wentz. The culture change that I alluded to at the top is coming. Josh Harris has been known for his use of analytics and his ownership of the 76ers and Devils. We'll see if the Commanders can finally enter the 21st century in that regard. When we look at Washington on the offensive side, I think there are a lot more questions here than when we get to the defense where some of the familiar faces return. Eric Bieniemy steps in for Scott Turner to take over as offensive coordinator. We can talk about his merits and what life will look like without Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. But I guess we can start with the low-hanging fruit, and that's the starting quarterback spot, where Sam Howell, a 5th-round pick out of North Carolina, widely expected after his freshman campaign in Chapel Hill that this could be a first-round draft pick, will be given the reins to lead the offense. But for anybody that's done their reading around Washington, it's got to raise a red flag if you have a head coach looking to try and save his job. And the number one thing he's done is praise Jacoby Brissett and how we shouldn't sleep on his backup quarterback.
This is one of the more difficult teams to handicap as a bettor because you can see the talent, right? And the Commanders have some strong parts, and undoubtedly, right, a team in the weak NFC will come from out of nowhere this season and surprise us. I actually want to start with Bieniemy, and obviously takes over as the Commanders' OC. I don't think anyone truly knows what he is. There's not a ton of data. The last time he ran his own offense, it was at Colorado in 2011 and 2012. Colorado's offense was 66th in schedule-adjusted efficiency the year before Bieniemy arrived. 2 seasons, Colorado was 72nd and 106th. We've kind of outlined over the last couple of years that Bieniemy's had 2 handfuls of head coaching interviews. Haven't gone well, and that's putting it nicely. I think it's very difficult to tell in advance. When you look at some of these offensive minds, like especially when they come from Andy Reid's tree, which assistants lean on Andy Reid and which ones actually assist Andy Reid. Doug Peterson is an elite offensive mind, right? I think we know. Matt Nagy, not so much. Probably too early to tell on Mike Kafka, but he's working with the right people behind the scenes to better himself as an OC and play caller, just like his current head coach, Brian Daboll. The vibe around Kansas City was Eric Bieniemy leaned on Andy Reid. Hoped he would have gotten a job a while ago internally, right? It was a byproduct of, Patrick Mahomes, but I think we'll have more concrete evidence soon. You hit it perfectly. Like, as of today, I don't want to call it a quarterback competition, but rather than build Sam Howell's confidence, of course, Ron Rivera, it's nuts. It's like you're a defensive mind and a CEO. Just be a defensive mind. There's a reason you brought in Eric Bieniemy, because you trusted him. Like, kind of interjecting fear recently and saying multiple times not to sleep on Jacoby Brissett as a starter, not confidence building, right? There's probably not enough data to know what Sam Howell was once thought of as an early round 1 pick, fell to the 5th round. Didn't run a complex college system, has a strong arm, he's mobile enough. Bieniemy's bringing in, an RPO-based system to Washington, so it's QB friendly. He's going to roll the quarterback out, especially behind this offensive line, I would hope. And then, you have Jacoby Brissett coming off a career year where he was 9th in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation the first 12 weeks last season. So I get why you might be a little bit excited there, but it was a perfect situation in Cleveland, right? I mean, the Browns have a strong run game, strong offensive line. We know what Brissett is. He holds on to the ball for a long time, and he has an elongated release. The Commanders' run game and offensive line is the inverse of Cleveland's.
How dare you talk poorly about the plotting stable of backs that the Washington Commanders have at their availability? Because when I think burst, I think Chris Rodriguez is the guy that's going to add explosive big play potential to my running back room.
Yeah, I mean, it's the running back room that has questions. The O-line, I mean, from a pass blocking perspective, Washington was 26th in pressure rate allowed last season, 25th in pressure rate allowed on quick throws. And the plotters at running back, it's not just Chris Rodriguez, but you have Brian Robinson Jr. Their most explosive, Antonio Gibson, continues to live in Ron Rivera's doghouse. He's basically the 3rd down back is what I'm hearing, but we'll see. The Commanders' O-line was also 24th in adjusted line yards created, 26th in yards created before first contact, and in word out of camp is the O-line has been taken to the woodshed every single day. And this probably is not good news. Jake Fromm has looked like the best quarterback in the first week.
You have more arm strength than Jake Fromm. No disrespect meant to the once talented Georgia Bulldog.
You look at the O-line across the board, right? It's Charles Leno Jr., one of the better pass protectors in the league, not a great run blocker. I like Sam Cosmi. He's solid. Supposedly going to get kicked into right guard because the big splash offseason move that the Commanders made was bringing in Andrew Wiley to start at right tackle. I think everybody knows my feelings there. I mean, he's a backup guard parading around as a tackle. If you look at Wiley, 16th percentile among tackles and pass block efficiency last season. The center and guard position, still very fluid. Nick Gates is your starting center for now. He's having snap issues in camp. Replacement level player to begin with. And then Chris Paul and Sadiq Charles are competing at left guard. Chris Paul's a 7th rounder who played below replacement level last season. Charles graded out 82nd among 88 qualifiers at guard. I'm hearing if Gates' snap issues continue, they'll move him to left guard and possibly start Ricky Stromberg, who is a rookie, at center. Let's just kind of monitor that situation, but it's not good up front. Pass catchers are the best unit on the Commanders' offense. We kind of, poor Terry McLaurin. I mean,
is he good, and man, is he stuck in purgatory.
Yeah, I mean, quarterback hell. Elite deep threat, 7th in yards per target, over 2 yards per route run again last season. Jahan Dotson, fantastic rookie campaign. Great short to intermediate complement to McLaurin. Curtis Samuel, very much a gadget guy used around the line of scrimmage. Still waiting on De'Ami Brown to take that next step. Hopefully, if it is Sam Howell, right, that North Carolina connection kind of revitalizes him a little bit. If you're a Commanders fan, though, I'm sure you've probably heard Chris Russell of the Team 980 and what he said about the offense after attending every single practice, and specifically the practice this past Friday. Chris covers the Commanders and, does a decent job, but Chris basically said, and I quote, "Be better, do better. It was wretched in every way, shape, or form. The quarterbacks all stunk. The receivers stunk. Too many drop passes. Too many balls not fought for. The 2+ hours I saw were horrific. The offense sucked today. It's been a week since I thought the Commanders looked close to an average offense. The offense was sloppy again in general. The last week, Jake Fromm clearly outplayed Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett. And last Saturday, in front of 10,000 fans, the offense sucked as a whole, but somehow didn't stink as bad as it did today. Today just made you want to barf." So it's very clear the transition to Eric Bieniemy's new offense could take some time. We still, again, don't know what Bieniemy is on his own. The quarterback situation is bottom 5 in the NFL. Offensive line has real issues, very little explosiveness in the backfield, and unfortunately, the Commanders see a massive uptick in schedule strength, especially on offense. Washington faced a bottom 5 schedule of defenses last season, projected to face a top 5 schedule this season, one of the largest increases in the NFL. So I'm not sure what this is going to look like.
Well, I mean, with such a portrayal, clearly you're telling all of our loyal Bet the Board listeners out there that when Washington plays host to the Arizona Cardinals week 1, that is going to go on the number 1 screen in the Payne Insider home office, because you're going to have to pay special attention to what those two teams look like. But all is not lost for the Washington.
That might be the best the offense looks like all season. Yeah, that's their largest favorite.
All is
game
not
there.
lost, though, on the Washington Commanders, because they still have a defense that should be more than capable. It's a group that finished 8th in points per game allowed and 3rd in total defense. Some of the metrics masked by how well they performed in the red zone, though, and getting off the field on 3rd down. Two things that you've taught not only me, but all of our listeners typically aren't sustainable year over year. When we look at the defensive line, they made their big money move by re-signing Todd Payne to a 4-year, $90 million contract before the start of free agency. He had his best season as a pro in 2022. Jonathan Allen went out there and he produced as well. There are huge expectations for Chase Young to return to his form of what we saw glimpses of before that knee injury. As far as the linebacking position, look, this isn't disrespect meant to Cody Barton coming over from Seattle, but if that's what you're getting the most excited about, I'm a little bit concerned about how you're going to look as a group. And the one area that I don't think gets talked about enough is the defensive secondary for the Commanders, because Payne, after Kendall Fuller, there's not a ton of big names out there, but there are expectations that you're going to plug in Emmanuel Forbes, who they drafted in the first round ahead of Christian Gonzalez, into the scheme and realize immediate dividends.
This is that strong part of the Commanders I mentioned earlier. What a season from the defense. I mean, top 10 in efficiency against a top 10 schedule of offenses without Chase Young for the majority of the season. And that was really the reason Washington was able to have positive close game variance, only losing 3 of their 9 one-score games. It was mostly because of the defense. Interception luck as well, but you probably told too many truths about the Commanders' offense already. Washington has, I think, one of the best defensive lines in football. I mean, Jonathan Allen and Todd Payne are a damn good tandem inside. Allen recorded a pressure run stop on over 11% of snaps, 3 straight seasons of elite pass rush grades. Todd Payne is solid. I think he gets a little bit too much credit. The 11.5 sacks got him paid, 9th most pressures from the interior. Not nearly the player as Allen in my mind. Outside, you have a healthy Chase Young, who should return to form as a solid pressure guy and edge setter to pair with Montez Sweat. Sweat had his best season as a pro, 14% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. Contract year for Sweat.
Shocking.
The D-line... Yes. I mean, I think he's going to have a big year just because of that contract year. I think the D-line's probably going to eat again, right? We're projecting Washington to face a bottom 5 schedule of pass-protecting offensive lines. I do worry about the depth up front. Basically, outside of Casey Toohill, Washington doesn't have many proven commodities past the first 4. Linebacker group, to your point, we'll see. I mean, you have Jamin Davis. He was an early round pick. You have Cody Barton, who you mentioned. They run a 4-2-5 scheme, so they don't play a ton of linebackers on the field. Davis made that leap to replacement level in year 2. Hopefully he makes a similar size improvement in year 3. If he does, then this group's going to play better than we think. Cody Barton comes over from Seattle. Last year was his first season as an every down starter. accumulated a ton of tackles, had just a 6% missed tackle rate. In totality, though, replacement level player. The Commanders' secondary has some variance to it, but it's a nice mix of veterans and young guys. Kendall Fuller, who you mentioned, enters season 8. Another damn good year last year. Solid corner. Cameron Curl went from good safety his first 2 seasons to elite last year. Elite run defender and tackler. If you look among the 62 safeties with at least 400 snaps, Curl also graded out 5th in coverage. Derek Forrest took over the starting safety job beside Curl. Damn good tackler and a plus cover guy. St. Juice and Danny Johnson return at corner, but Washington went out and with their first 2 picks drafted Emmanuel Forbes and Quan Martin. Both actually have a chance to start or play significant snaps as rookies. Let's monitor the Forbes groin situation. He pulled it on Friday, claims it's no big deal. Washington signed a corner off the street a day later. So let's see. Hopefully that does not linger into the start of the season. Washington faces another difficult slate of offenses this year. I think there's a reason you go out and draft 2 corners the first 47 picks, and it's because you face a top 5 schedule of pass offenses. And if that wasn't enough, a top 5 schedule of run offenses as well. Washington is unfortunately one of 2 teams we have power rated as a bottom 10 team in the league, but has to face a top 10 schedule overall. Again, I like some of the young pieces. Great D-line. A couple guys with talent that can ascend and raise the floor and the ceiling. New ownership should eventually help, right? There's adults in the room now. You referenced some of the analytical approaches to the guys that they've brought in above. But, for 2023, Washington's favored in 1 game by more than 2 points this season. It's their home opener. When you're fighting for wins, getting coin flip games at home is crucial, even if there isn't a massive home field advantage in Washington. Hopefully the fans come out a little bit more this year that, now that Daniel Snyder's gone. Instead, Washington plays Buffalo, Philly, Miami, San Fran, and Dallas at home, all top 10 teams. And then you think about what it takes in this league to win on the road. Typically, it's stability at key positions within an organization. We've talked about this a lot, right? GM, head coach have no clue what their futures hold with this new ownership group. Reports of Jake Fromm being the best quarterback in camp. That doesn't sound overly stable to me.
Apparently Washington Commanders fans that are tuning into the podcast, brimming with optimism and excitement for the regime change, may have to wait a little while but before the fruits of their labor can be redeemed. And this group can look like a perennial contender in the NFC East, knowing the trajectory that we've seen from Dallas, Philadelphia, and that the Giants clearly have the pieces in place, even if they won't be able to reach the heights that they got to a season ago. The fun, however...
listen. If Eric Bieniemy is Andy Reid Jr. and Sam Howell is a competent quarterback and the defense plays the same level it did last season despite the uptick in schedule strength, you could be the team that surprises in the NFC. It's just a lot of ifs at a lot of crucial positions.
It's always so tricky when you have a young quarterback in there learning a new scheme that doesn't have an offensive line that can mask some of his inabilities, at least early on, to try and process at an NFL speed. To your point, doesn't have the weapons to lean on in the backfield. Just means that the defense is going to have to create a lot of short fields, and if Washington can settle for field goals inside their opponent's 35-yard line, they'll be able to put some points on the board. But we'll obviously monitor the situation and see exactly how the market handles them on a week-in, week-out basis. But what I was saying before, the fun's not over, Payne, with the NFC East, because we talked a little bit about some of the injury storylines to pay attention to, and obviously to do so, we bring in a man that's significantly smarter than both you and me. You can follow Deepak Shona on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis with his NFC East preseason injury report.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Shona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
Thanks for having me, guys. Now, the NFC East looks like one of our healthier divisions overall, but of course there are some very relevant injuries, and none bigger, especially for fantasy football players, than Tony Pollard. Now, he broke his ankle but should pick right up where he left off. The the return averages about 4 to 6 months for running backs. He'll be at 8 by week 1. And our data shows that running back numbers don't noticeably dip even in year 1 post-injury, as long as that year 1 starts after the 6-month time point. And again, he will be past there, so we have high expectations for Tony Pollard. Regarding durability, he has a mild elevation in his re-injury risk, but no major real concerns here. And then his teammate, not actively injured, but Michael Gallup has had a very relevant injury impact to his recent performance. A January 2022 ACL tear meant that for the 2022 season, a big-time dip in his performance was expected. Now, he has about average athleticism for a starting wide receiver, and he's 27 years old, so you factor these into our algorithm, and it predicts overall a bounce back to his pre-injury baseline for this coming year. Overall, it looks like you could get him at a reasonable value in most fantasy drafts. And then a little less optimistic on the defensive side of the ball for the Cowboys, Jordan Lewis. Now, he had a Lisfranc fracture dislocation, basically broken bones in an area where they were misaligned in the foot, and that was in October. Now, the average return on these Lisfrancs is about 10 to 11 months, but in Jordan Lewis's case, they describe this as a highly severe injury. So week 1 would be a little surprising at just about average timeline. October is really a more realistic return time point. However, for this position, because the demand is on quickness and reaction speed, the typical performance does drop for the first year back and probably won't return to baseline for Jordan Lewis until second year after injury. And then we have in Philadelphia, James Bradbury, big name, but minor injury. He has a groin strain right now that should resolve by week 1 without any major effect on his performance. But the key here is that some of these preseason muscle strains do cause an increased risk from baseline for recurrence, and that's about 15% in this case. His teammate Nakobe Dean, a little less concerned, minor ankle injury, which basically from the description implies that it's a low ankle injury. These are very common and not usually the cause of recurrence risk, so no real concerns here. And then we move to the Giants, and key factor for them this year, Evan Neal. He's on the concussion protocol. Now, that is significant, not because we expect it to cause him any missed time, but more so because of the prolonged nature of subsequent concussions. The first concussion of the year usually takes 1 to 2 weeks with the new protocols. The second becomes a little longer, averages more closer to 3 weeks, and in some cases can be more severe as well. And then we have Wan'Dale Robinson. Now, he's likely returning somewhere in that week 4 to 8 range, currently on the PUP. The stats do dip the year 1 after the ACL, but in Robinson's case, the machine learning models predict his improvements up to about 90% of his pre-injury baseline by the end of the season. The elite athleticism really works in Robinson's favor, so that 90% should look pretty good if he's able to avoid any of the minor setbacks that commonly do occur when a player is returning from the ACL. And then we have Sterling Shepard, his teammate, who looks to be a little bit ahead of him, but we have a little bit less optimism overall for this year's outlook. The reason is that he had the 2021 Achilles, and that causes about a 2-year dip for players. And then the 2022 ACL causes another 1-year dip. So he's kind of in the middle of both of those as we speak, but he's young and he's a 75th percentile athlete. So towards the end of this season, and particularly by 2024, we do project him to recover his pre-injury baseline performance. And then another Achilles case, James Robinson. Now, very unclear injury situation here. He did get cut, but we don't know how much of that was related to performance versus team need. The Achilles has historically been a 2-season blow to the running back performance. Robinson's timeline to return last season was very impressive, but his performance was somewhat lacking, and we do anticipate real progress between the end of last season and the start of this one, but it wouldn't be until late November that he projects to return to near pre-injury form. And as you may remember, we saw something similar happen with Cam Akers. He, last year, really struggled early on, and part of that was probably mental, but part of that was very likely physical. Towards the end of the year, however, he looked like a star running back again, and that is certainly in the cards for James Robinson, but Cam Akers started off as a higher rated athlete and also was more heavily invested in by the Rams, so he was likely to get a little bit more leeway and opportunity than James Robinson. And then in Washington, overall a relatively healthy team so far. We're looking at Logan Thomas dealing with a minor calf strain. It's really likely nothing major to worry about and very unlikely to affect his early season availability or even carry much recurrence rate by the time the season starts. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Well, I mean, the good thing, Payne, about listening to Deepak's injury report today compared to the first one that he issued, there didn't appear to be a lot of impact players that were on there, and the Dallas Cowboy fans should at least be optimistic that Tony Pollard can look like the explosive back that they got glimpses of last year as the 1-2 punch member of that Cowboys backfield.
And for our sake as well, that Tony Pollard is humming from week one.
Need him to get out there. That or Dak will chuck the ball around the yard 50 times to get us to the promised land if need be. And Brandon Cooks, my friend, go out there and catch 80 balls opposite CeeDee Lamb. But we do have one final order of business, and I know you warned our listeners that there may not be a truly actionable element necessarily on all of these preseason podcasts. So since we don't rehearse any of this before we get to rubber meeting the road, is there a best bet and somewhere you're going to steer our listenership to keep their bankroll in action for the duration of the season?
Yeah, as Todd alluded to, right, he goes into his cocoon and whips up some notes. I go into mine and do the same, and then we just show up at a set time and we record. So obviously you heard our last breakdown of the Washington Commanders. This is something we've bet, and I actually had sent this to Todd, but it probably got lost in the abyss as he was frolicking with Simba in the safari. There was no cell connection there.
By
without him
design,
knowing
both
this,
the two of us needed a reprieve from one another for 2 weeks of radio silence.
Yes. And without Todd knowing that, because of not getting it, just randomly text me. He said, boy, I don't really like Washington this year. And so here we are. And we don't need to deep dive this because we've talked about the Commanders for 15, 17, 18 minutes. It'll be time-stamped above, but let's go with the Washington Commanders. Under 6.5 wins, minus $1.20.
All right, Washington Commanders. Ron Rivera, get that resume ready, because if you guys win 6 games, Josh Harrison Company may be looking for a new man to lead the charge there and bring the Commanders into the 21st century. All right,
one thing we didn't talk about, and it's, we mentioned the schedule being difficult, right? And this is kind of something as, a general statement, but applies to Washington here, is when you start to go through a schedule, it's not just about, the difficulty of, win totals or projections of the units that are going to be faced, but sometimes when you play teams and at what point. And I think the part that kind of got us over the top and abstracted a little bit more value is what you're seeing in the week 2 markets, where the Denver Broncos have been bought, but it's not reflecting that in the win total market price. One thing you've known if you've listened to this, one of the toughest places to play early on in the season is at altitude in Denver, and the mystery of the unknown of what, Sean Payton's going to bring to this offense probably isn't going to be known early in the season. And so that week 2 game, well, it looks like, hey, just Denver on the schedule. If you look at it from a power rating perspective, hey, not the biggest gauntlet, but it becomes a little bit more difficult early in the season there at altitude without knowing what Sean Payton's offense with the Denver Broncos is truly going to be.
Great point. You have to find all of those things that aren't built into the season-long markets, especially early on in the campaign. As I flip over to the odds screen, I see every single preseason game for week 1 starting to take some money one way or another. The always fun portion of the program.
Last Friday morning, last Friday morning, games were getting buried.
It's amazing to watch these markets. We know how fluid the prices can be amid speculation that which quarterbacks will or won't play and what those game plans will look like. Although if last year was any indication, those plans often change when you get 2 combined practices before you get into actual game planning in and of itself. But preseason, a different beast for a different day. We are officially done with the East, and by my simple math over here, Payne, that means we're 25% down of the NFL divisional preview. 6 left to go. We'll be back with all of our loyal listeners on Thursday for a division that, you know what, we know which division we're doing, but we'll wait for all of them to tune in as they should, because money to be made in every single one across the board. So thank you, as always, for tuning in. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And with a Washington Commanders regular season win total under 6.5 minus $1.20, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.